This is the Semi-Modular Thing. It's a collection of utilities that I find useful to use with my Mother-32 or Minibrute, and indeed it should be useful with any semi-modular since they generally have a limited number of molds and mixers and LFOs, etc. On the bottom right, there are two three-way passive multiples. These are quite generally useful, but for this demo I'll be using them so I can show the waveforms on an oscilloscope while also using them for modulation or audio. The first utility module we'll look at is the Sub-Oscillator. This will generate a square wave at 1 or 2 octaves below an incoming wave, though if the input's been through a resonant filter or wave folder or such, the effects can be a little more unpredictable, and perhaps desirably so. One of the outputs is just the subwave, and the other is a mixture of the input wave with a controllable amount of the subwave mixed in. At or near the full mix, there will be some clipping. You can hear how adding in the sub-oscillator adds a lot of depth to the sound. Next is the LFO. This uses an electric Druid tap LFO chip, and it generates 16 different waveforms organised in 2 banks, which I call standard and alternate. The output can be either unipolar or bipolar. In unipolar mode, the output goes from 0 to 5 volts, and the inverted output from -5 volts to 0. The range toggle applies a factor of 1, 2, or 4 to the speed. There's also a clock output for syncing with other devices, and a sync input. Let's look at the waveforms. There's triangle, square, sawtooth, ramp, sample and hold, lump, sweep, and a sine wave to complete the standard set. And then their evil twins. There's a sine plus octave, sine plus a third harmonic, sine plus the fourth harmonic, random slope, ramp plus octave, quad ramp, a quad pulse, and stepped. Now I can slow it down a bit with the range selector so we can see some of them a bit better. And also switching to unipolar, you can see the difference in the output there. Best use of the LFO is made by using the Attenuverting Mixer. Now I'll use pitch as the modulation target since it's easiest to hear the effect. So with the mixer, column 1 is normal to a constant voltage, supporting a range from about -5 to +5 volts. Column 2 is normal to the LFO. And column 3 is normal to the sample and hold. which we'll look at in a minute. The three associated switches determine which signals appear added at the mix output at the bottom. Now, sample and hold is clocked by the LFO, so the sample rate is determined by the LFO rate. Here I'm feeding in the triangle LFO output from the Mother-32 and changing the input frequency and the sampling frequency. Now I'm taking the signal instead from the mixer, so I can scale the pitch modulation range and we can listen to the effects. There's also a fixed white noise output, plus low pass noise and high pass noise normal to the endpoints of the crossfader. Alternatively, you can put other signals into the crossfader. Here I'm using the Mother-32 sawtooth and square wave VCO outputs, so the crossfader output is a mixture of those two. And some quite nice effects are possible, especially when you include some pulse width modulation. And that's it for a brief rundown of the features of the Semi-Modular Thing. Thanks for listening.